¿Cuál ha sido su experiencia, John, en el tema de Manimal en este episodio y también de Vindicator? ¿Cuál ha sido su experiencia?
Well, John, welcome to John Jatenjor's interviews. Today, we're going to ask you some questions about your very vast experience in the field of visual effects with both Stan Winston Studios and Legacy Effects, which is basically your baby.
Yeah.
And the first question we wanted to ask you is about your first steps, especially with the TV show Manimal, which only lasted just a few episodes, but it became like a cult classic on TV because of how innovative the visual effects were for the time and how ambitious they were. And also another cult classic in which you work with the master Stan Winston, which is Vindicator, which has been called, which at first was called like a Terminator ripoff, but I mean, you guys both work on the original thing, but Vindicator has a flavor on its own. So how was your experience working on those two?
Okay, well, there's some interesting old topics to bring up. So the reason we ended up working on Manimal was that Shane Mahan and myself were hired to work on the Terminator. Then the Terminator got put on hold for a short period of time. And instead of letting us go, Stan kept us around and we started to work on the TV show Manimal. And we started with some pickup shots because he had already done things for the series, but we had to refurbish puppets and that type of thing, and then start working on new episodes. And that's when I got to really first show Stan what I could do. And I was working on this hawk transformation. And the character of Simon McCorkindale was changing from himself into a hawk. So there was these change-o heads, as we used to call them back then. So that's how we ended up working on Manimal. And the experience was terrific. You know, I really enjoyed it because I was getting to work in the field of special effects, and that was my dream. So your second question was the Vindicator. So Shane and Richard Landon and I went up to Montreal, Canada to work on the film. It got retitled The Vindicator. I think it was called The Frankenstein Factor or something like that. But after the success of Terminator, they changed the name to Vindicator, which sounds more like the Terminator. And yes, people said, oh, it's a ripoff and all this stuff. But it got going before the Terminator ever came out. I think they changed the name to make it sound more like the Terminator, the Vindicator. But it actually was a very different story. And I learned a lot working on that film. I would say my film school was from Stan Winston and James Cameron. But it also, going up to Canada and being by ourselves, we had to learn a lot of things about shooting movies and reading call sheets and being prepared for the next day. So anyway, Vindicator was a good experience. I'm going to go shut this door so you don't hear the...
Okay, next will be my question, a personal question that I have for you. I know the time is too short to cover up like more than 40 years of incredible work, because checking on your filmography, it's really immense. But I wanted to ask you about two projects that came from the later decade, which was the 90s. Okay. One of them is Interview with the Vampire, which was a project that also was handled by Stan Winston Studio and had some really amazing visual effects, makeup effects that still hold up today. And also another project that is very infamous for its behind the scenes drama, which is The Island of Dr. Moreau. I know that some cast and crew members do not really want to speak about that experience. I mean, David Thewlis, for example, is an actor who has refused to speak about what happened in that island in Australia during the mid 90s. But if you could give us tell us something about, or an anecdote about your experience on Moreau, that would be really awesome.
Okay. Well, the first one that you brought up was which again? Just so
Interview with the Vampire.
Interview with a Vampire. That was something that Shane and I really wanted to do, because we had read the Anne Rice books and we really liked the stories, and thought, oh, this would be great to do this vampire thing. So in a way, we had to convince Stan, because we just finished with Jurassic Park, this amazing, collection of dinosaurs and, state of the art electronics and hydraulics and all this stuff. And then Stan's first comment was, what do you want to? You want to do a movie about fangs and teeth and vampires? And once I think Stan read the script and he talked to Neil Jordan, and he got to understand what it was going to entail, he was enthralled as well too. And at the time, we had a fledgling company, Stan did, called Digital Domain, and we were starting to do visual effects. And Stan had just hired Rob Legato to sort of head up the visual effects. So he was doing visual effects on Interview with a Vampire. We were doing all the makeup effects and makeups and things. And Neil Jordan, had an interesting vision. And for me, I think the script really sticks pretty closely to the books. And it was an enjoyable experience. It was neat. It was great. And then you brought up The Island of Dr. Moreau. I didn't actually go and work on that film over there. I was more involved in the United States. And then I went off on another Val Kilmer movie, which was called Ghost in the Darkness, which I guess when he finished with The Island of Dr. Moreau, he flew to South Africa to work on the other movie that we were doing, which was The Ghost in the Darkness, which was based on a true story of those two lions from Savo that killed over 100 people. So interesting. But when I was in the States, trying to prepare all this work to send it to Australia for shooting, they made the director's change. And the new director came on, and I had to take him around the studio and show him everything and try to get him up to speed with what was going on and the designs. And because John Frankenheimer, experienced director, he probably, if he had started from scratch in the beginning, he might have had different designs or whatever than Richard Stanley. But he realized, I don't have time for this. Let's just work with what you're doing. You guys know what you're doing. And so I showed him everything and got him up to speed. And I continued, getting stuff done and shipping it to Shane, who was down in Australia working on The Island of Dr. Moreau. And yes, it was quite the experience, apparently. The director getting fired, and I heard stories of him hanging out with the cast and crew and living in the jungle and watching the movie as it was being made. And John Frankenheimer was trying to make sense of this whole thing. It was, I think there's a documentary on it that's pretty intense. But unfortunately, I wasn't there, so I don't have any anecdotal stories to tell you except for second or third hand.
No problem. That's a pretty good story overall. John?
Yes.
The other John.
Oh, the other John. Okay.
Bueno, ya mencionó unas películas increíbles, también mencionó otras clásicas. Bueno, ya es algo sobre conspiraciones, sino ya es en el buen sentido de la palabra, sino cómo, no solo cómo define la experiencia, sino también qué es bueno para el tema del fin del mundo. Invada Marte o que aparezca el Leviatán, así como son dos producciones buenísimas que él ha participado.
Now, the following question would be more about your experience with, once again, two titles that have to do sort of with the end of the world. In this case, the first one would be Invaders from Mars,
Okay.
and the Peter Weller cult classic Leviathan, which was also another film that was kind of ignored on its time, but it has accumulated a cult following over the years and has some really impressive underwater effects, which were not really made underwater, but you can tell us more about it.
There were some effects that were shot, like the tank at the end, and there were some things that we shot second unit that were underwater. But yeah, a lot of it was dry for wet, and they would put smoke in the air, and it looked like it was underwater. But so Leviathan, and the first project that you mentioned was which one?
Invaders from Mars.
Right. Invaders from Mars. So we started out, that was Toby Hooper directing that one. And we started out working on that, sculpting a lot of characters and things. And then Aliens came about. So before I actually got to go to set with these creatures that we had done, I went off to London and started setting up a shop there for Stan, because we worked at Pinewood for almost 7-8 months. We lived in outside of London working on Aliens. So Invaders from Mars was filming while we were over there in London. The lead up to that, though, Shane and I got to do a lot of sculpture. We did the big creatures. I've forgotten what they're called, but Stan had an interesting way of, he had two people sort of in the suits, and he had a little person that was up on top, and then a bigger guy underneath that was moving the thing around. Very, very interesting. Interesting stuff. And then the other one that we were talking about was which one?
Leviathan.
Oh, right. Leviathan. So Leviathan was interesting. We got that job before James Cameron got The Abyss. And back then, Stan didn't take on more than one project at a time. So Leviathan had a lot of work for us. And we shot that in Rome. And that was, an interesting experience. After living for 7-8 months in London, it was actually Windsor, I was excited, because here I am, a single guy, and you get to travel the world and do all this stuff and get paid to do it. So here we were going to go repeat the same process again, go off and shoot in Rome. So that was very exciting. The movie I thought was an interesting film. But then, James Cameron's The Abyss came up. And so he was asking if we could come work on that. And he actually offered a job to Shane and I if we wanted to leave Stan and go work for him on The Abyss. That was a hard decision in one sense because, I was loyal to James Cameron, but I was more loyal to Stan. So I wanted to stay with Stan Winston. and we had already made a commitment to work on Leviathan. So I was good with that. So that's the path that we took. Leviathan, yeah, it was an interesting movie. Lots of different effects, lots of different mechanical things. We did both the dive suits and the transformations and the monsters and the makeups. So we had a lot to do on that film. It was very interesting.
From your extensive catalog, we also have to mention the work that has been done in the name of legacy effects since Iron Man 2, which is the first movie credited with legacy effects after the incredible work that you guys did on the first Iron movie, where you built the suits and made a great blend of practical and CGI. And there is a particular title that I wanted to ask you about. And in this case, one of the things that I find interesting about legacy effects is the way that it still tries to bring a lot of practicality in a very digital world. In when you guys build suits, for example, or weapons, utility weapons for certain properties, and it's an interesting way to see it because it doesn't leave the legacy behind of those types of effects. So what has been the biggest challenge for legacy effects throughout all of these more than 15 years of existence, and seeing that there is a lot of people struggling to make visual effects as an artifact as possible, like malleable, touchable, but at the same time using the advantages of digital effects, which now may be seen in jeopardy because of the rise of AI.
Right. Well, it's a lot of interesting things. I mean, after Jurassic Park, it felt like there was a backlash against practical effects. Producers felt like, oh, we can just do it CG. I don't have to make a decision right away. I don't have to do anything. And then they found out that there's good CG, which was in Jurassic Park 1, and there's bad CG. And it's like any tool used by any artist. It can be good or it can be bad, depending on what you do with it. And I think there was a sense of, well, if we can write it, we can do it, we'll just do it CG. And I think that kind of bit them in the butt because they started to, I mean, in Jurassic Park, the digital team was very concerned with gravity and weight and all of the things that you need to have. And then suddenly there was lots of characters that were flying through the air, and they looked more like video games than they did real things. And then eventually, I think that started to settle down. But legacy, carrying on Stan's legacy, was to, do top-notch work, and we had to figure out how to do it with smaller budgets and less time. And even in the days when I was working for Stan, it never felt like we had enough time, enough money. But with legacy, you sort of learn that I need to deliver this A+ artwork in the shortest time possible. And we adopted a lot of the rapid prototyping and 3D effects and things like that. And I personally, and Stan had the same outlook, we're never afraid of CG. It was like, embrace it. It's here to stay. There's really great qualities about it. And, if we can aid them in any way, we should. And they aid us in ways like on the TV show, The Mandalorian, which I did several seasons of. The baby Yoda, as the world knows him, but Grogu was his real name. Hats off to ILM. They helped us so much bringing that puppet to life because they would paint out the puppeteers and rods and things. But we were able to, by moving rods and things, it's a simpler way to make it move in a more effective way. But without CG, we couldn't do that. And before that, take a movie like Aliens. I once had a young director ask me which shots were digital, which were real. And well, back on Aliens, everything was real. There was no digital back then. And so you had to figure out ways to hide the rods or the cables and all of these things, which later on, once the advent of CG came about, it helped us in that you can just paint all that stuff out. You can get rid of it all. I hope AI doesn't take over, but, unfortunately, it feels like there's a sense in the visual arts business, is let's make it cheap. Let's do it as cheap as possible, as quick as possible, because that saves money. And when I was brought up in the film world, it was the producer's job and the director to put the best product on screen, and then you make the money later. But now I think it's all about trying to make the money up front before, in case it doesn't do well. And I think having that kind of fear is a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, because if you fear that it's not going to do well, it won't do well. But if you go into it with the idea that it's going to be highly successful and people are going to love it, then it is. It's we control our outcomes. And I think people, and maybe it's driven by other things, I don't know. But I was an artist first and then became a businessman. I mean, Stan taught me an awful lot about show business. It's called show business, not show art, not show play, not show fun. It's called show business. It is a business, and they do need to make money. And you learn your role too, because when you get into this as a young artist, you think everything that you do is going to be magic and is going to help the movie. But the thing is, the movie, if it doesn't have a great story, nobody cares. You can have the best special effects in the world, and if it's a silly story, nobody's going to watch it. Nobody's going to care. They're not going to say, oh, that had great effects in it. No, they're going to just say that was a bad movie. And anyway, I'll get off my soapbox and get back to the question at hand. So the Iron Man, the digital, I think we felt like if we can help the digital team out in any way possible, let's do it. And I think actors, and I've had them say to me, I'm glad we had your dinosaur. We're glad we had your suit. We're glad you had your creature or whatever there for me to react to, because acting is about reacting. And if you deliver a great performance with a creature or a monster, it's going to affect the way they act. And so anyway, I always felt like if we can do something practical, even if the vast majority is going to be CG, it'll anchor the performance. It'll give the actor something to react to. And he'll know how big it is and what it looks like. And so when we're not there, he can imagine what it would be like or what it would feel like. And I don't know. I think so. There's a symbiotic relationship between us and the CG. When I say us, I mean Legacy or Stan Winston Studio. there's wonderful things they do, and I hope they're not replaced by AI. But I don't know. We'll see. Hollywood and the money people are always looking for a way to cut a corner. So we'll see.
Sure they do.
Yeah.
También quiero mencionarle yo acerca sobre dos producciones. Bueno, para mí están infravaloradas, que la primera es una de las mejores actuaciones de Anthony Hopkins. Bueno, aparte del Silencio de los Inocentes, está la de Instinto. Y es increíble. Y está también la de, bueno, no sé, para muchos es como un gnomo duende. Entonces, es una de las también producciones más emblemáticas.
So the following question is about two projects that are not as well known as, let's say, Jurassic Park or the Terminator or the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but they're amongst the favorites from my colleague John Jatenjor, and it is Instinct, starring Sir Anthony Hopkins.
Yes,
in one of his most underrated roles, and for John, it's like his second favorite performance of his after Dr. Hannibal Lecter.
Wow.
And also, he wanted to ask you about another project which he finds underrated, which is called A Gnome Named Norm.
Okay. All right. So Anthony Hopkins, what a pleasure that was working with him. Ishmael was what it was originally called, and then it became Instinct. Ishmael is kind of I understand why they changed the name of it, but it gave us a chance to build gorillas in gorilla suits. And, the way was sort of paved by Rick Baker on, he had a couple of projects where I think it was Greystoke, and then the one Diane Fossey story. So we sort of, went from there, and we got a chance to build really realistic gorillas. And before we started building and doing all this, Stan was taken on a safari to go see real gorillas. And so I think that experience helped, with the authenticity of it. And I think Anthony Hopkins' performances, his performance in Instinct was stellar, and it elevated it. And yes, I agree. It was a good movie. And I feel like the gorilla effects that we did in that movie hold up to this day. I mean, most people, I had friends that thought they were just filming with real gorillas, and it's like, no, we there's not a real gorilla in the movie. So that was exciting, and that was a lot of fun. And so the second movie that you brought up was which one?
A Gnome.
Oh, right. A Gnome Named Norm. So that was the second movie that Stan directed. And we started designing and working on that when we were working on Leviathan. So we were over in Rome, and I remember Stan was preparing and getting ready to do that. And we sculpted the gnome and made all these heads and different things. And Anthony Michael Hall was in this movie. And Stan really put his heart and soul in it. And I met my first wife on this movie. She was a music editor. So there was a lot of good times. We had just come back from Rome, and then we finished up building all of the things for A Gnome Named Norm. And then we started shooting around Los Angeles with that project, and Stan directing. So it felt very comfortable, because we've now known and been through a lot with Stan. And we had yet to do Jurassic Park, but we had done Aliens and a lot of things with James Cameron. I hadn't done two T2 yet either, which was probably the most difficult movie I ever did in my life. That was really a hard one. But A Gnome Named Norm, it was a lot of fun. Yeah, I have a lot of fond memories of that one. And, you know, like I said, we started working on it, designing and building when we were in Rome. And then when we got back to LA afterwards, we dove into it headlong. Got a lot done.
Thank you for that answer, John. And my final question would be about not specifically a movie, but an experience. Okay. Because when we create something as filmmakers or as artists, one of the most interesting but also stressful experiences is to watch your own work with a crowded audience, especially with a bunch of unknowns. And you worked on some of the biggest movies ever with some of the most innovative visual effects ever made. I mean, some of these special effects have held up incredibly well after 30 plus years. But since you mentioned several times your work on Jurassic Park, I wanted to ask you, how was your experience seeing that movie in a movie theater for the first time with a whole crowd? Did you feel nervous or stressful? Excited?
You know what? We get to see it beforehand, and on that movie, I went and I saw it actually before we saw it with an audience. But seeing it with an audience, it really brings things home. Because the first time you see a movie, you are stressed out, and it's usually at the cast and crew screening, and you're hoping everything looks as good as you remember. But once again, after you shoot 20 takes of something, who knows which one they select? And it all comes down to the editor. He can make you look like a genius, or he can make you look foolish. And people forget that movies are really made in the editing room, because the first stage, when you're shooting, you're trying to get as much out there as possible and, you know, get footage for them to cut. And when they cut it, they really can either, you know, cut out and make it look good, or they can stay on it just a little too long. And so anyway, that first experience of seeing Jurassic Park, you are nervous because you want it to look good. And I should have known this. I mean, it's like a James Cameron film. Steven Spielberg film is going to be an amazing movie. So it was a great ride, and the editing was superb, and they picked all the right stuff, and I came away feeling good. So when I went to see it with an audience, what you don't have is they don't know the story. They don't know the shots like you do. So they're seeing it all for the first time. And in a way, you get to see it through their eyes. And it was an amazing experience. And then you go out to dinner afterwards, and you hear people around the tables next to you talking about the movie and the dinosaur's foot when it came down in the mud and whatever stuck in their mind. And it gives you a sense of pride, you know. My son was born about a week after Jurassic Park opened. And I remember being in the hospital, and all the nurses were saying, that guy worked on Jurassic Park, you know. And so it was amazing. And seeing it through the audience's eyes is always a good experience. And it's more than just Jurassic Park. I mean, that one was one that, you know, sold $1 billion worth of tickets. And Avatar was like that. I mean, there's 3-something, almost 4 billion in ticket sales or whatever. But, you know, I remember The Predator and Aliens, and, you know, going and seeing those movies with an audience. and they laugh at, you hope that they're going to laugh at the right places and get scared, and they do, and it's very fulfilling. Yeah. And I'm sorry I was late to this call.
It's okay.
Y por último, vamos a finalizar con, dos preguntas en una, y es, ¿cómo define toda su experiencia en una palabra? Y si nos puede hablar sobre el tema de la experiencia en Poli. Poli es la del loro. No sé si has visto la película del loro ya. Es increíble,
Sí.
es muy gracioso.
Hace muchos años, de hecho. De hecho, no recordaba su existencia hasta que vi el IMDb. Okay, John. So the final question would be, first, it will be divided in two. First, how would you define your entire career and experience in a single word? And the last is about your experience on a little movie called Polly, which is about it's a movie that I honestly didn't remember it existed. I didn't remember its existence until today. And it's a movie that I used to watch a lot when I was a kid. So
okay, I would say my career, blessed. I was so fortunate. I think I got in this business at the right time and got to experience the explosion of special effects and got to witness, the transformation of effects, CG being, the whole, I feel like I was in the golden era of effects, and I feel very fortunate for my 40-year career, which was very blessed, I would say. Polly was an interesting film. I didn't go on set with Polly, but we learned a lot of new techniques, and we were very involved with DreamWorks, after our Jurassic experiences. So we were sort of the go-to guy for a long time. And hats off to a fella named Patrick Rummans, who's by trade was a taxidermist. But we came up with new techniques of building a bird puppet that looks like a real parrot, but yet wasn't. It was a puppet. And so we got to expand our horizons quite a bit on that movie. And Patrick's expertise, we learned how to make the Aflac duck, and anything with feathers, it became sort of in our wheelhouse because of our work on Polly. And Polly was a seminal moment for making birds and puppets out of birds. And we learned we didn't learn, we invented techniques of how to do puppets with birds. It was quite cool.
Well, you did a wonderful job, because for 20-something years, I thought that was a real bird.
Well, I think there was some shots where there was a real bird, but for most of it, it was not. It was a puppet. Well, I'm glad we did our job. And it's like, don't believe anything you see on TV or in the world, because there's people like me that are being paid to fool you. But anyway, thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Okay, John. So one last thing before we go. Tell us where we can find you on social media. What will be next for you in your illustrious career? And because we see that you are still working in a lot of projects as of now. This year, you were on one of the...
I've retired. I retired after 40 years. I don't work in the movie, TV, commercial business anymore. I retired. If you see my name attached to things, I don't think it's real. I think it's people, I still get phone calls. People don't know that I've retired. So I'm pretty low key guy now. I'm just trying to enjoy the fruits of all the years and labor. And I like doing these interviews like this because I get to think about all the things that I had the opportunity to work on and do, and very grateful for that. And thank you.
John, thank you so much for the opportunity. God bless you, man. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Gracias por la oportunidad. Bye bye, John. Bye, John. Thank you so much.
All right.